My name is Michelle. I'm 32, and I never thought the day would come when my twin sister, Emily, would carry my baby. We've always shared everything, but nothing could have prepared me for the emotional roller coaster I was about to face. My husband, Jake, seemed supportive at first, but even now, I can't shake the feeling that something shifted the moment Emily got the positive pregnancy test. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family drama and emotional courage. It was a cold Tuesday morning in early November when Emily walked into my kitchen with her hands tucked nervously into the pockets of her oversized sweater. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but I barely noticed it. My chest was tight with anticipation and anxiety. Today was the day of her first IVF procedure. My heart raced as I set the mug down, trying to act casual. "Are you ready?" I asked, forcing a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. Emily nodded, but didn't speak. Her blue eyes, so much like mine, shimmered with something I couldn't name. Was it fear, excitement, or hesitation? Probably all three. She had always been the braver twin, the one who took risks while I calculated every step. But today, she was the one taking the biggest risk for me, and I felt a complicated mix of gratitude, guilt, and unease. Jake leaned against the counter behind me, sipping his own coffee and frowning at his phone. I noticed the way his eyes flicked toward Emily occasionally, lingering a second too long. I shook my head, telling myself I was imagining things. He was my husband, and Emily was my sister. There was nothing more to it. Still, a small seed of doubt planted itself in my chest. The drive to the clinic was silent except for the hum of the car engine. Emily held my hand tightly, and I tried to relax into her grip. Her thumb stroked the back of my hand absent-mindedly, and I realized how small gestures like this could bring both comfort and a strange sense of tension. We'd always been close, but the thought of her literally carrying my child added a layer of intimacy that was almost overwhelming. At the clinic, the sterile smell of antiseptic hit me immediately. It always did that to me, reminding me that no matter how personal or emotional a process felt, it was also clinical, precise, and exact. Emily sat in the chair as the nurse explained the procedure again, going through every step. I watched her closely, noticing how her hands trembled slightly when she clasped them in her lap. "You'll be fine," I said softly, though my voice shook a little. "You're doing this for me. For us." Emily smiled, but it was small, tentative. "I know," she whispered. I want to make sure I do everything right." After the procedure, we went out for lunch at a tiny diner nearby. Emily picked a corner booth, and we sat across from each other with our coats draped over the chairs. I watched her pick at her salad nervously, and for the first time, I noticed how real this all was. The baby wasn't mine yet, but it was already affecting every detail of our lives. The way we spoke, the way we looked at each other, the way Jake's eyes lingered at Emily during our conversations. He made a joke about the waitress forgetting his coffee refill, and Emily laughed, lightly, a sound that made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't explain. I reminded myself to breathe. It was just lunch. It was just a laugh. Nothing more. But small moments piled up like pebbles in my chest. The way Emily sometimes brushed against him when reaching for a glass. The way she laughed at his corny jokes, even when I didn't. The way Jake sometimes looked at her with a softness I hadn't noticed before. I told myself these were harmless, ordinary things, but deep down, a niggling voice whispered that the dynamics were shifting. Back at home, we tried to carry on with normal life. Emily stayed with us during the first few weeks after the procedure, helping around the house, cooking dinner, folding laundry. On paper, it was perfect. She was doing what I could never do, and Jake seemed supportive. But the tension in the air was almost tangible. Sometimes I would catch Jake staring at Emily in a way that made my chest tighten. Other times, Emily would glance at him, and their eyes would meet briefly, a spark of connection that left me feeling dizzy and unsettled. One evening, I was folding laundry in the guest room, sorting clothes for the coming week, when I overheard them in the kitchen. "I just want to make sure she's comfortable," Jake said quietly. Emily's soft reply followed. "I know. I don't want to make her feel anything, you know." My hands froze. The tone of their conversation, the unspoken tension, the care laced with something I couldn't name, it all hit me like a punch. I didn't run in. I didn't scream. I stood there, frozen, listening. My mind raced with possibilities, doubts, fears. Was it just sisterly and husbandly concern, or was there something more brewing beneath the surface? I wanted to confront them immediately, but a small voice in my head told me to wait, to observe, to understand. For now, Emily was carrying my child, and I had to navigate this carefully. The next few weeks were a blur of doctor appointments, vitamins, and careful monitoring. Emily handled the physical side with remarkable strength, even smiling through mild cramps and fatigue. Jake and I attended every appointment together, but I noticed subtle differences in the way he spoke to Emily, his voice softer, his words more careful, more personal. My heart ached with jealousy and fear, even though I tried to rationalize it. One Saturday, we went grocery shopping. Emily pushed the cart while I walked beside her, Jake trailing slightly behind. In the crowded store, I watched them interact. He reached for a can of soup, and she said, "Here, I'll grab it for you." Her hand brushed his as she passed it over, and he smiled in a way that made my chest tighten painfully. I looked down at my hands, gripping the cart, trying to breathe. It was ridiculous to feel this way. I told myself. She was my twin. He was my husband. And yet, the human heart is rarely rational. Later, that evening, we cooked dinner together. Emily chopped vegetables while I stirred the pasta. Jake leaned against the counter, teasing her about overseasoning the sauce. I laughed along, but a tight knot remained in my stomach. Even as I smiled, part of me wanted to pull Emily aside and ask her if she felt it too, the strange electricity, the tension, the weight of carrying my child while our lives subtly shifted around her. A small, seemingly insignificant incident that week deepened the tension. Jake left his jacket in the living room. Emily picked it up absent-mindedly, draping it over the back of the sofa. She didn't notice me staring, my pulse racing as I considered the intimacy of such a small act. When Jake returned, he reached for it, and their hands brushed again. The room felt charged with something unspoken. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction, every glance, every laugh. My mind was a whirlwind of gratitude, guilt, fear, and jealousy. Emily was giving me a gift that few could understand, and I wanted to be happy, but I couldn't escape the creeping doubt that something was changing in ways I couldn't yet name. The next morning, I found a note from Emily on the kitchen counter. It was simple, almost casual. "Thanks for trusting me. I hope I'm doing right by you." Her words should have comforted me, but instead, they reminded me of the delicate balance we were living on. She was carrying my child. She was a part of this most intimate, life-changing journey. And yet, she was also a separate person with thoughts, feelings, and desires of her own. I realized then that the pregnancy was more than a physical experience. It was emotional, psychological, and fraught with tension I couldn't fully control. Over the next few days, I started keeping a small journal. I documented every emotion, every observation, every fleeting thought. Jake noticed and teased me gently. "Planning to write a novel about us?" he asked with a smile. I laughed, but the act of writing helped me process the complicated mix of gratitude, suspicion, and love I felt for both him and Emily. Emily, too, seemed aware of the shifting dynamics. She became more careful, more attentive, more reserved in certain ways. Yet she never stopped being kind, thoughtful, and supportive. It was a paradox. Her presence was both a comfort and a source of tension. One afternoon, while Emily rested on the couch, I sat beside her and took her hand. "I can't tell you how much this means to me," I said softly. "I know it's not easy." She smiled, squeezing my hand. "It's not just for you," she whispered. "It's for all of us. I just want this baby to be safe, happy, loved." Her words were simple, but the weight behind them was immense. I realized then that the pregnancy was not just about my desire to become a mother. It was about family, loyalty, sacrifice, and the fragile, shifting emotions that bind people together. By the time the first trimester ended, I had begun to notice small changes in Emily. The way she laughed, the way she rested her hand on her stomach, the way she sometimes looked at Jake with a softness that made me uneasy. The seed of doubt had grown into a small but persistent knot in my chest. I tried to distract myself with everyday life, cooking, work, errands, friends. But nothing could fully erase the awareness that our lives had changed. Emily was carrying my child, yes, but she was also an individual with her own heart, her own emotions, and her own influence on the people around her. And somewhere along the way, I realized that the most challenging part of this journey wasn't the pregnancy itself. It was navigating the invisible, delicate emotional terrain that it created. The days that followed the first trimester passed in a strange blur of routine and unease. The air in our home felt heavier somehow, as if the walls themselves held the tension that had begun creeping in quietly. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it started, but something about the way Emily moved through our house, or the way Jake watched her, made my chest tighten with a sensation I could neither name nor dismiss. It started with small gestures. I noticed Emily lingering a second longer than necessary in the doorway when Jake entered the room. I caught the way her hand brushed against his arm, brief, casual, almost accidental, but my stomach twisted anyway. My rational mind told me I was overreacting. She was my twin, and he was my husband. There was no harm in a touch, but emotions are rarely rational, and my feelings swirled into a quiet storm I couldn't calm. Even at breakfast, tension seemed to coil itself around us. Emily sat across from me, her fork hovering over a plate of scrambled eggs. Jake was pouring coffee into his mug, and I noticed the way their eyes met over the rim. Just for a moment, long enough to feel it in my bones, and then they both looked away. I forced myself to smile, trying to act as if nothing had shifted, but the warmth that should have come from the sun streaming through the kitchen window felt distant, muted. I tried distracting myself with chores. The laundry room became my sanctuary, folding clothes with deliberate precision, hoping the mundane rhythm would calm the racing thoughts in my head. But even there, I wasn't alone. I could hear the soft laughter from the living room, the kind of laughter that belonged to people who shared jokes and comfort. The sound wasn't wrong. It was a perfectly ordinary laugh, but hearing it directed at someone other than me left a hollow ache in my chest. One Thursday afternoon, I found myself lingering near the doorway as Emily arranged the living room cushions for the umpteenth time. Jake appeared with a basket of mail, flipping through letters with a distracted air. Emily glanced at him and smiled, a genuine, open smile, and I froze mid-step, my stomach clenched, as I realized that the simple, everyday motions we had taken for granted were now charged with tension I hadn't anticipated. Every glance, every smile, every word became weighted with unspoken meaning. I decided I needed to talk to Emily to at least acknowledge the growing unease between us. "Hey," I said as I perched on the edge of the sofa where she was adjusting the pillows. "Can we talk for a second?" She looked up, her eyes curious but cautious. "Sure, what's up?" I hesitated, trying to find words that wouldn't make things worse. "I don't know. I guess sometimes I feel like something's changing. Between us. Or maybe between you and Jake." Emily's brow furrowed slightly, a sign that worried me more than it comforted me. "Michelle, you're imagining things," she said softly. "We're all under a lot of stress. The pregnancy, the appointments, the routines, it's a lot." I nodded, but I didn't feel reassured. Her words were meant to calm, but they felt like a brush over a canvas that had already started cracking. I wanted to believe her, wanted to take comfort in her reassurance, but my instincts told me there was something more subtle happening, something that wasn't being said aloud. The next morning brought another small but significant shift. Jake and Emily were in the kitchen preparing breakfast, and I walked in to find them laughing quietly over a misread label on the cereal box. The sight should have been trivial, a small domestic moment, but instead it made my chest tighten. Their laughter felt intimate, almost conspiratorial, and I couldn't help but feel like an outsider looking in. I left the room quietly, letting the bathroom door click behind me, and leaned against the cool tile wall. My reflection in the mirror looked tired, anxious. I pressed my palm to my forehead, trying to steady my breathing. Every ordinary domestic scene had begun to feel like a puzzle I was missing pieces to. The ordinary joy of family life was becoming something I couldn't fully inhabit, without doubt creeping into every corner. In the days that followed, small incidents piled up. Emily would hum softly while folding laundry, a tune that reminded Jake of a song from their college days, and his smile would soften in a way that made my heart ache. Or she'd place a hand lightly on his shoulder as he reached for the salt during dinner, and I felt an inexplicable pang of jealousy, even though the gesture was entirely innocent. I tried to occupy myself with errands. Grocery shopping became a kind of therapy. I would wander the aisles, picking up items for dinner, for the baby, for the house, trying to ground myself in the tangible act of living. But even outside our home, I couldn't escape the subtle shifts in my perception. Every glance at Jake and Emily interacting in public, every easy laugh they shared, seemed loaded with unspoken meaning. One particularly quiet afternoon, I found myself sitting in the park with my journal. I had started documenting every observation, every uneasy feeling, every fleeting emotion. It helped me make sense of the chaos in my mind, though it didn't soothe the ache entirely. I wrote about the way Emily's eyes lingered on Jake when he wasn't looking, about the softness in his voice when he spoke to her, about the tension I felt in my chest that I couldn't explain. Writing it down made it real, and the reality was both comforting and terrifying. At dinner that evening, the tension reached a subtle peak. Emily had prepared her favorite casserole, and the smell of baked cheese and spices filled the room. Jake complimented her cooking, his voice unusually warm. I smiled politely, but inside, I felt a storm building. I realized that I was hyper-aware of every word, every glance, every gesture. The ordinary act of eating together became a minefield of emotions. After dinner, Emily suggested we all watch a movie. I agreed, but I found myself sitting slightly apart from them on the couch. Jake and Emily shared a blanket, and I felt a pang I couldn't easily define. I closed my eyes briefly, pretending to rest, and when I opened them, I caught them exchanging a glance, so brief I almost missed it, but my heart recognized it. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay awake, tracing the lines of our ceiling, listening to the faint creaks of the house settling. My mind replayed every interaction of the day. I wondered if Emily felt the tension, if Jake noticed it, or if they were completely oblivious. And then the hardest thought of all crept in. Maybe they were aware, and I was the only one pretending not to notice. The following week brought a small but shocking revelation. I had left my phone on the counter while making a smoothie, and a message notification flashed from Emily's phone across the room. I resisted the urge to read it, my moral instincts screaming at me to respect her privacy. But curiosity gnawed at me relentlessly. Later, when she left the kitchen to grab something, I saw the message, a mundane conversation with a friend, but the way Emily's face had lit up while typing it made me pause. It was a small thing, almost insignificant, yet it reinforced the idea that I was no longer the only focus of attention in this carefully structured dynamic. At one point, I confronted Jake, not about suspicion, but about my own feelings. Sometimes I feel left out. I admitted quietly, my voice barely above a whisper as we sat on the porch swing. It's like I'm watching instead of participating. I know it's irrational, but it's how I feel. Jake's hand found mine, squeezing gently. "Michelle, you're not left out," he said softly. She's helping. It doesn't change anything. I promise." I wanted to believe him, and part of me did, but the instinctive knot in my chest didn't fully relax. I realized that reassurance alone couldn't dissolve the subtle shifts that had begun to permeate our daily life. The unspoken words, the quiet glances, the small gestures, they carried weight. And I was learning that love, trust, and family are not always visible in the things said aloud. Emily seemed aware of the tension, too. One evening, she pulled me aside while I was organizing the pantry. "Michelle, I know this is hard," she said, her voice low and earnest. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable. I want to do this right for you, for your baby." Her sincerity cut through the swirl of emotions. I nodded, holding back tears. "I know, sometimes it feels like I'm watching my life change, and I don't know where I fit in anymore." We stood there in silence, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the room. In that quiet moment, I realized that the pregnancy was not just a physical journey. It was an emotional one, fraught with shifting alliances, hidden feelings, and unspoken words. The subtle shifts between us, though delicate, had already begun reshaping the contours of our relationships. Life continued, each day marked by small but significant incidents. Jake would leave for work, and Emily and I would share a moment over coffee that was lighter, more casual, yet tinged with the awareness of the growing emotional complexity between us. Sometimes we laughed about trivial things. Sometimes we cried quietly about fears and uncertainties. One late evening, I overheard Jake talking on the phone outside in the garage. I couldn't hear the words clearly, but I sensed urgency and concern in his tone. My heart raced as I realized that even when I wasn't present, the subtle shifts and undercurrents of our household were in motion. Small, seemingly insignificant actions carrying meanings I might never fully understand. By the end of that month, I had begun to adapt in small ways. I learned to navigate the new dynamics with caution, speaking openly when necessary, but also choosing moments to observe, to process, and to understand. The pregnancy had introduced a delicate web of unspoken words, emotional tension, and subtle shifts in behavior, and I realized that my survival in this new landscape depended on my awareness and emotional intelligence. The unspoken words lingered like ghosts in every room, in every gesture, in every glance. I couldn't control them, and I couldn't erase them, but I could learn to navigate them, to exist within them without losing myself. And as the days unfolded, I began to understand that the real challenge of this journey wasn't the physical pregnancy. It was the subtle, invisible reshaping of hearts, trust, and relationships that it brought into our lives. I had begun to settle into a fragile rhythm. When the day arrived, that would change everything. The subtle tension, the unspoken words, and the quiet observations that had occupied my thoughts for weeks suddenly converged into something undeniable. I had come to accept the delicate shifts between Emily and Jake, telling myself it was nothing more than imagination, a byproduct of my insecurities. But that morning, reality cracked the illusion I had so carefully maintained. It was a Saturday, and sunlight poured through the kitchen windows in warm, golden streaks. I had woken early to make coffee, craving the comfort of routine before the household stirred. As I poured the steaming liquid into my favorite mug, I noticed Emily's phone light up on the counter with a message notification. The sound was soft, almost polite, but my eyes were drawn to it automatically. I tried to shake it off, focusing instead on the rich aroma of coffee and the gentle hum of the refrigerator. A few minutes later, I heard Jake's car pull into the driveway. His arrival was always subtle, a quiet thrum of the engine, but today it felt like a drumbeat in my chest. Emily glanced toward the door, her smile quick and practiced, and I felt the familiar pang of unease twist inside me. There was something in the way she straightened her posture, the tilt of her head, the softness of her eyes, that made my heart quicken with both gratitude and fear. I tried to distract myself by organizing the pantry. Opening cans and jars, lining them up neatly, I forced my mind to stay on the mundane. But even as I stacked items by size, I could hear the faint laughter of Emily and Jake in the living room. It was subtle, casual, but I noticed the way Jake's hand brushed hers as they reached for the same magazine on the coffee table. My breath caught, and I pressed my palm against my forehead, trying to calm the sudden rush of suspicion that felt almost unbearable. Later, I found myself upstairs, folding laundry in the guest room. I tried to focus entirely on the rhythm of the task, letting the repetitive motions soothe the storm of thoughts swirling in my head. But the sound of their conversation drifted up from the living room. I couldn't hear every word, but the inflection, the pauses, the laughter told me there was something beneath the surface that I hadn't noticed before. And then it happened, the first undeniable crack in the surface of our carefully maintained lives. Emily's phone buzzed again, and she left the living room to answer it in the hallway. I heard her whisper, though the words were faint, "I can't believe this is happening. I don't know what to do." My stomach lurched. I recognized her tone instantly. It was the voice of someone struggling with a decision, a secret, a truth that couldn't be spoken openly. I froze, unsure if I should follow, retreat, or intervene. Something deep inside me, a mix of fear, instinct, and anger, compelled me to listen. The words continued, muffled but still piercing the quiet air. "I just don't want Michelle to find out. She would never understand." My chest tightened, and a cold wave of panic swept over me. The phrase "never understand" echoed in my head, and I realized with a sinking feeling that Emily was hiding something significant. My mind raced. Was it something about the pregnancy? Something about Jake? The possibilities multiplied and twisted into a tight knot of dread. I waited, silent and tense, until Emily hung up. She leaned against the hallway wall, her hand trembling slightly. Her face was pale, and for the first time in weeks, she looked vulnerable in a way that wasn't tied to the pregnancy itself. "Michelle," she called softly, sensing my presence. I stepped forward, my voice unsteady. "And what's going on? Who were you talking to?" She glanced at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's nothing, Michelle. Just work stuff. Don't worry about it." But her eyes betrayed her. They flickered briefly, avoiding mine. And I knew then that this was no ordinary secret. My mind was already spinning, replaying every interaction, every glance, every laugh from the past weeks. Subtle shifts, unnoticed moments, casual touches. They all suddenly felt like pieces of a puzzle I had never fully seen. I decided I needed answers. I couldn't confront her directly without risking a denial or defensiveness, so I began to observe more carefully. I watched her interactions with Jake, noting every slight gesture, every shift in posture, every glance that lingered too long. And as I watched, I realized something terrifying. The tension I had sensed wasn't imagined. Something significant had changed between them, something that required discretion and subtlety. Over the next few days, the undercurrent of secrecy deepened. Emily began to withdraw slightly from me, offering less conversation, fewer smiles that weren't tied to necessity. Her attention was increasingly focused on Jake, but always carefully balanced, never overt. It was as though she were walking a tightrope, aware of both my presence and the boundaries of propriety. Jake, too, began to act differently. He was still kind and supportive, but there were moments when his expressions softened, his tone changed when Emily was nearby. I noticed these moments with a mix of fascination and dread, feeling as though I were witnessing something I wasn't meant to see. Every gesture, every glance became a message I was desperate to decode. One evening, I found a note in Emily's handwriting tucked under the edge of the sofa cushion. I hope she never knows. I can't let her hurt. I held it in my hands, my pulse racing. The words were small, almost innocuous on the page, but their meaning was explosive. It confirmed my suspicion. Emily was hiding something, and it was connected to both Jake and me. I wanted to confront her, but a deep fear rooted me in place. What if the truth destroyed everything? What if the careful balance we had maintained for so long collapsed in an instant? That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I traced every sound, every movement in the house, trying to anticipate what might happen next. My thoughts spun in endless loops. Had I missed signs before? Was I imagining things? Or was this the culmination of weeks of subtle shifts, of laughter that lingered too long, of touches that felt slightly too intimate? The next morning, I decided to confront Jake first. I found him in the garage, tinkering with his car. The scent of motor oil and dust filled the air, grounding me slightly in the mundane reality of life. But I couldn't shake the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "Jake," I said, my voice steady but urgent, "I need to know something. Has anything changed between you and Emily?" He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. For a moment, I thought he might deny it, but then his expression softened, and I saw a vulnerability I hadn't noticed before. "Michelle, it's complicated," he said quietly. "It's not what you think, but it's not nothing either." My heart hammered. "Then tell me. I can handle the truth. Just don't keep me in the dark." He sighed deeply, leaning against the car, his hands gripping the edges of the hood. "Emily, she's been scared. She cares about you, but this pregnancy, it's brought up feelings she never expected. And I didn't handle it perfectly. I tried to protect everyone, but I may have made things more confusing." Confusion, fear, and a dull ache settled in my chest. The subtle shifts I had observed, the unspoken tension, the stolen glances, all of it was real. My mind flashed back over every small incident. The laughter over a cereal box, the hand brushing his arm, the whispered phone conversation. Everything was connected now. I felt betrayed, not just by them, but by the illusions I had held onto so tightly. The home I had thought was safe, ordinary, and predictable had become a labyrinth of hidden truths and emotional complexity. I wanted to cry, to scream, to run, but I also knew I had to understand. I had to face the reality of what was unfolding. In the days that followed, the hidden truth continued to reveal itself in subtle ways. Emily became quieter, more introspective, yet always attentive to the needs of the pregnancy. Jake acted cautiously, aware of the delicate balance, but I could sense the unspoken tension growing between them. And I, Michelle, stood in the middle of it all, caught between gratitude, fear, suspicion, and the desperate need to protect myself and my child. One afternoon, I found myself in the nursery sorting tiny clothes that Emily had folded neatly. Each onesie, each pair of socks, felt heavy with meaning. The room was bright, filled with sunlight, but I could feel the shadows lingering in the corners, the shadows of unspoken words, hidden feelings, and secrets yet to be fully revealed. Emily came in quietly, carrying a stack of blankets. She placed them gently in the crib, her movements precise and careful. "Michelle," she began, her voice tentative. "I don't want to hurt you. I need you to trust me." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I do, Em. I need to understand." For the first time, she hesitated, then placed a hand over mine. The gesture was simple, grounding, yet it carried the weight of everything unspoken. And in that moment, I realized the truth wasn't just about betrayal or secrecy. It was about love, fear, and the fragile threads that connect us, even when circumstances are impossible to control. The hidden truth had unfolded, revealing complexity I had never imagined. But it also illuminated the path forward, understanding, patience, and the courage to confront emotions I had long avoided. I knew this journey would not be easy, but the clarity it brought, painful as it was, allowed me to see the situation in its full depth. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange mixture of fear and hope, a recognition that despite the hidden truths, I could navigate this tangled web of emotions, protect my child, and perhaps even find a way to preserve the relationships I loved most. The morning began like any other, but the air in our home felt heavier than usual, as if it had absorbed every unspoken word, every glance, every tension-filled pause from the past weeks. I was in the nursery, folding tiny onesies, the soft cotton brushing against my fingers like a reminder of everything at stake. Emily had left the room for a moment, probably to fetch water, and Jake was downstairs, the faint hum of the dishwasher the only other sound. I felt the knot in my chest tighten. Something was coming, something I had been dreading without fully admitting it to myself. Jake appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. There was no greeting, no small talk, just that tense pause that made my stomach clench. He didn't move toward the nursery, just stood there, hands in his pockets. And I knew immediately that this wasn't going to be ordinary conversation. "Michelle," he said softly, almost afraid to speak the words. My heart sank. "We need to talk." I set the folded clothes down and gestured to the chair. "Okay, what is it?" He hesitated, his eyes darting toward the window and back again. "It's about Emily and the baby." The world seemed to tilt slightly. I braced myself, a cold weight settling in my chest. My mind raced through possibilities, financial, emotional, medical, but none of them prepared me for the reality he was about to lay out. "I've made a decision," he continued, his voice low, deliberate. "It's not easy, but I think it's the best way forward for everyone." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "Jake, just tell me." He took a deep breath. "I've decided. I think Emily should be more involved in decisions about the baby than I initially thought. I want her to feel included, to have a say. It's only fair." My chest tightened, so suddenly I had to sit down. "A say? Jake, it's my baby. I know she's carrying it, but—" He shook his head. "It's not just about carrying. She's invested. She's scared, she's worried, and I don't want her to feel like she has no control over something so important." I thought about it a lot, and this feels like the right choice. I stared at him, my mind spinning. Control? Right choice? It sounded reasonable on the surface, but my stomach screamed betrayal. The subtle shifts I had been feeling for weeks, the stolen glances, the laughter that lingered too long, the quiet touches, now made sense. Jake's decision was the culmination of everything I had sensed but hadn't dared name. "Do you realize what you're saying?" I asked quietly, trying to keep my voice from trembling. You're saying she has more rights than me? That she can influence decisions about my child? He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. It's complicated, Michelle. I'm not taking sides. I want to prevent conflict. And I think if she's included, it might ease tensions instead of creating them. I felt a hot rush of anger, but it was mixed with fear, confusion, and hurt. The subtle shifts, the unspoken words, the hidden truths, they had all been leading to this moment. And now, the truth was laid bare. The delicate balance of trust and loyalty in my home was tipping, and I didn't know if I could stop it. I left the nursery abruptly, needing to escape the suffocating weight of his words. I wandered into the backyard, the crisp morning air hitting my face. The trees swayed gently in the wind, leaves rustling like whispers of a world that seemed calm and ordinary, even as my life felt anything but. I needed space to think, to breathe, to process the reality of Jake's decision. Emily joined me silently a few minutes later, her hand brushing against mine as she stood beside me. Michelle, she began, her voice soft, almost hesitant. I didn't want it to be like this. I turned to her, unable to control the surge of emotions. Like what, Emily? Like you have more say than me about my own baby. Her eyes filled with tears, and I realized she had been carrying a weight as heavy as mine, but in a different way. I never wanted to hurt you. I don't know how to navigate this either. I'm scared, and I want to do what's best. For the baby, for you, for Jake, for all of us. Her words, soft and tremulous, were meant to soothe, but they didn't. They only amplified the ache in my chest. I felt cornered, betrayed, and utterly unprepared for the tangled emotions swirling around me. We stood in silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The backyard seemed both expansive and confining, a mirror of my inner turmoil. And then, for the first time, Emily reached out and took my hand fully in hers, a gesture of peace and connection that was both grounding and disorienting. I'm scared too, Michelle, she whispered. I'm scared of losing you, of hurting you, of making a mistake. Please understand that. I closed my eyes briefly, letting her words sink in. She was my sister, my twin, and the bond we shared was deeper than I had ever allowed myself to acknowledge fully. But that didn't erase the raw ache, the fear, the jealousy that had been simmering beneath the surface. When I opened my eyes, Jake was there, standing a few steps away, watching us with an expression I couldn't read. His hands were in his pockets again, a small, unconscious habit that now felt like a shield, a barrier between us. I know this is hard, he said quietly. I don't expect you to understand everything right away, but I truly believe this is the best way forward. I shook my head, feeling the first real tears prick at my eyes. Best way forward. I repeated, my voice shaking. Jake, this isn't just about what's best. This is about my life, my child, my trust. And suddenly, it feels like I've lost control. He stepped closer, his expression softening. Michelle, you haven't lost control. I'm not trying to take that away from you. I want us all to feel safe, to feel like we're working together. That's all. But the words fell flat. I couldn't shake the sensation that the subtle shifts I had felt for weeks, the glances, the laughter, the small touches, had now culminated in a decision that changed everything. The emotional equilibrium of our household was disrupted, and I wasn't sure how to reclaim it. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in our home was charged with an almost unbearable tension. Every interaction between Emily and Jake carried the weight of unspoken truths, and I found myself hyper-aware of every gesture, every glance, every word. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way Jake lingered slightly longer in conversation with Emily, the way Emily's voice softened when she spoke to him, The small, almost imperceptible ways their presence together seemed to ripple through the air. One evening, I was preparing dinner when Emily approached me with a dish towel draped over her shoulder. "Michelle, do you want help chopping vegetables?" she asked softly. I hesitated, swallowing the lump in my throat. "No, it's fine," I said, forcing a smile. But the tension between us was palpable. She nodded and stepped back, giving me space, but I could feel the weight of her presence, the undercurrent of emotions that neither of us dared fully voice. Later that night, Jake and I sat on the couch, the room dimly lit by the soft glow of the lamp. "I know you're upset," he said, his voice quiet. "I know this feels unfair." I turned to him, tears slipping down my cheeks. "Unfair? Jake, it feels like my world has shifted overnight. Everything I thought was safe, everything I trusted, it's all changed. And it's because of a decision you made without me, without asking me." He reached for my hand, but I pulled back instinctively. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he whispered. "I was trying to protect everyone. I misjudged how it would feel." The room fell silent, filled only with the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock. I realized in that moment that protection and betrayal were sometimes separated by only the thinnest of lines. And that line had been crossed in ways I couldn't ignore. The days that followed were a delicate dance. Jake tried to reassure me, to explain his reasoning, to maintain balance, but the subtle shifts in energy, the unspoken tension, and the lingering doubt made every interaction feel like walking on a tightrope. Emily, too, became quieter, more reflective, yet attentive in ways that reminded me of the sacrifices she was making. One afternoon, I found her sitting on the porch swing, gently stroking her stomach. I sat beside her, letting the silence stretch between us before speaking. This is harder than I thought it would be," I admitted. She nodded slowly. "I know. Me too." We sat together, hands brushing occasionally, sharing a quiet understanding of the tangled emotions that bound us. The shocking decision had shifted everything, but it also revealed the depth of love, fear, and loyalty that connected us. And in that moment, I realized that navigating these changes, painful as they were, would be the defining challenge of our journey. The weeks that followed Jake's decision were unlike anything I had ever experienced. At first, the air in our home remained thick with unspoken tension, the quiet weight of strained glances and careful gestures stretching across every room. But gradually, a subtle shift began to emerge, not from them, but from within me. I realized that if I wanted to survive this delicate and emotionally charged journey, I had to confront the feelings that had been simmering beneath the surface: fear, jealousy, insecurity, and anger. More importantly, I had to find a way to reconcile them with love, gratitude, and self-respect. One morning, I woke before sunrise. The world outside was still wrapped in the soft, pale light of early morning. I slipped into the kitchen quietly, careful not to wake anyone, and poured myself a mug of tea. I held it close, letting the warmth seep into my hands and, slowly, into my chest. As I sipped, I allowed myself to reflect on everything that had happened, the subtle shifts I had noticed, the hidden truths that had been revealed, the shocking decision that had left me feeling unmoored. I realized that the pain I felt wasn't just about betrayal. It was about identity, about control, and about redefining what it meant to be a mother, a sister, and a wife. I decided to take a walk, hoping the crisp morning air would help me think. As I wandered down the quiet streets of our neighborhood, the soft crunch of leaves beneath my feet seemed to echo my own tentative steps towards self-discovery. I thought about Emily, the twin I had always relied on, whose love and bravery had carried my child when I could not. I thought about Jake, whose decision, though shocking, had been driven by care, even if misjudged. And I thought about myself, Michelle, the one who needed to learn not only how to navigate others' choices, but how to understand and trust herself. That morning, I encountered a small park bench near a cluster of maple trees. I sat, letting the sun warm my face, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to cry, not in anger or fear, but in recognition of the weight I had been carrying and the truth that had been waiting for me. I needed to accept what I could not control and embrace the power I had to shape my own emotional world. Returning home, I found Emily in the kitchen, arranging flowers she had picked from the garden outside. She looked up as I entered, her expression cautious yet open. I decided to break the silence that had been building between us. I said softly, I'd been thinking, maybe I've been so focused on what's happening around me that I forgot to think about what's inside me. She nodded slowly, setting the vase of flowers down. I think we've both been caught in the same storm, Michelle. But storms pass. Sometimes they leave us stronger than before. Her words resonated with me. I realized that part of my journey wasn't about controlling Emily or Jake or the circumstances of the pregnancy. It was about accepting the reality, no matter how uncomfortable, and discovering what kind of mother, sister, and wife I wanted to be within it. Over the next few days, I made small but deliberate changes. I stopped overanalyzing every glance and every gesture. I allowed Emily to take the lead in the nursery setup without feeling threatened. I noticed Jake's intentions without assuming they were always about favoritism or betrayal. Slowly, the house began to feel lighter, not because the tension had vanished, but because I had started to release the need to control it. One afternoon, I sat in the nursery holding a tiny onesie that had "Mommy loves you" stitched into it. Emily entered quietly, carrying a basket of folded baby clothes. Instead of the usual tension, there was a gentle warmth in the air. "Want some help?" she asked, offering the basket. I smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. "Yes," I said, and we worked together in companionable silence, folding clothes, organizing drawers, and laughing softly at the little mismatched socks that seemed to multiply overnight. That moment, ordinary and domestic, felt like a turning point. It wasn't about control or decisions. It was about connection, understanding, and trust. That evening, Jake joined us for dinner. The atmosphere was calm, warm, and surprisingly light. I realized that acceptance wasn't passive, it was active. It meant recognizing my emotions, confronting them honestly, and choosing to move forward without resentment. I could see that Emily and Jake had their own fears and hopes, just as I had mine. And in acknowledging all of it, I felt the first true sense of balance in our home. The following week brought another small, yet significant moment of self-discovery. I was in the garden, planting herbs for the kitchen, when Emily came outside with 2 mugs of tea. She handed me one, and we sat together on the porch swing, watching the late afternoon sun paint golden streaks across the lawn. "You've changed," she said softly, her eyes reflecting the sunlight. I smiled, feeling the truth in her words. I think I finally realized I can't control everything, I can only control myself, and I want to choose love over fear. She nodded, her hand brushing mine briefly, a gesture full of shared understanding. "That's all I ever wanted for you, Michelle, for us." The journey of acceptance also brought moments of reflection about my own identity and strength. I started writing in a journal daily, documenting not just the events, but my emotions, insights, and realizations. Through writing, I discovered patterns in my own reactions, times when jealousy clouded my judgment, moments when fear made me suspicious, and instances where gratitude had been buried beneath anxiety. By acknowledging these emotions openly, I could process them rather than let them control me. One evening, as I journaled, Jake came into the room quietly. "Michelle, he said, sitting beside me. "I see a difference in you. You're lighter, calmer, happier." I smiled, though a small ache lingered. "It hasn't been easy," I admitted, "but I think I'm learning to separate what's mine from what's theirs. I can't control everything, but I can control how I respond and how I love." Jake reached over, taking my hand in his. "That's exactly what I hope for you. For all of us." Even Emily noticed the change. One morning, she hugged me tightly, whispering, "I'm proud of you, Michelle. You've found your strength in a way I never expected." Strength wasn't just about enduring emotional turbulence. It was about finding clarity, compassion, and resilience within myself. I realized that the pregnancy had been a catalyst, not just for the growth of a new life, but for the growth of my own self-awareness. I was learning to navigate complex emotions, to set boundaries without resentment, and to embrace love even when circumstances felt uncertain. Small incidents continued to reinforce this growth. When Emily accidentally spilled coffee on the counter, I didn't snap. I simply helped her clean it up, laughing softly at the mess. When Jake forgot to pick up groceries, I reminded him gently without letting irritation fester. Each moment of patience, understanding, and forgiveness felt like a step towards self-discovery and emotional maturity. The most profound realization came one evening when I was alone in the nursery, rocking a small stuffed animal, as if it were the baby. I closed my eyes and imagined the life growing inside Emily, the tiny kicks, the rhythmic heartbeat, the promise of new beginnings. And I understood that my love for this child didn't depend on control or perfect circumstances or even the absence of mistakes. It depended on acceptance, accepting Emily's role, Jake's decisions, and my own capacity to love deeply and without fear. From that day forward, the subtle shifts in our household no longer felt threatening. They felt human, normal. Life wasn't perfectly balanced, but it was real, messy, and beautiful in its imperfection. I could see Emily laughing freely with Jake without my chest tightening. I could watch Jake's thoughtful gestures toward both of us without suspicion. And most importantly, I could look at myself in the mirror each morning and recognize a woman who had grown stronger, wiser, and more compassionate through every challenge. The final step in my journey of self-discovery came unexpectedly. One morning, Emily handed me a letter she had written during one of her quiet afternoons. It was a note of gratitude, love, and apology for any unintentional hurt caused. Reading her words, I felt tears welling up, not of sorrow, but of profound understanding. I realized that acceptance was a shared experience. It wasn't just about me learning to let go. It was about mutual recognition of vulnerability, intention, and love. As the weeks turned into months, our home settled into a rhythm that balanced care, respect, and emotional honesty. I had learned that self-discovery wasn't a final destination, but an ongoing process. Every glance, every conversation, every small gesture became an opportunity to practice empathy, patience, and understanding. The journey had begun with subtle shifts, unspoken words, hidden truths, and a shocking decision. It had ended with acceptance, resilience, and the discovery of my own strength. And as I sat in the nursery one quiet evening, holding a tiny pair of socks and imagining the life to come, I realized that the most important gift of this experience wasn't the baby alone. It was the transformation within myself, the ability to navigate life's complexities with courage, compassion, and love. I whispered softly to the room, "I'm ready." And for the first time in weeks, the warmth that had eluded me returned, not just from sunlight streaming through the window, but from the profound realization that I had discovered the most important truth. Love, patience, and self-understanding can flourish even in the most unexpected and challenging circumstances. As I sit here now in the quiet of our home, holding the small reminders of a life that is yet to fully arrive, I realize how much has changed, not just around me, but within me. The house, once filled with subtle tension, unspoken words, and the invisible weight of secrets, now feels alive with connection. The laughter is softer, yes, but also warmer. The glances no longer cut like knives, but instead carry understanding, trust, and mutual respect. I can watch Emily and Jake interact without the sharp sting of jealousy, without the gnawing feeling of being an outsider in my own life. I see the care in Jake's eyes, not just for me, but for Emily as well, and I understand that love doesn't diminish when it includes more than one person. It multiplies. It's messy, imperfect, and sometimes difficult to navigate, but it is real and it is enough. I think back to the moments that shook me the most: overheard whispers, fleeting glances, decisions made without my input. Each one of those moments felt unbearable at the time, as though the very foundation of my life was crumbling. And yet, each one taught me something invaluable. I learned that fear can masquerade as anger, that jealousy often hides a longing for connection, and that control is an illusion we cling to when we're afraid of what might happen. Acceptance, I discovered, isn't about surrendering your voice. It's about choosing when to speak, when to listen, and when to trust yourself to handle the unknown. Looking at Emily, now, the sister who carried my child, I feel a surge of gratitude that almost overwhelms me. She didn't betray me. She gave me the greatest gift of all, the chance to experience motherhood when my body couldn't, and the opportunity to see love and selflessness in action. Our bond has deepened in ways words cannot fully capture. I see the courage it took for her to navigate this pregnancy, to manage her own fears while keeping my trust intact. And I see myself in a new light, stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than I ever imagined I could be. Jake's role in all of this is no less transformative. His decision, once shocking, almost unthinkable, was a catalyst for growth, a mirror that reflected my own insecurities and forced me to confront them. He didn't act with malice. He acted with intention, and in doing so, he gave me the space to discover the strength that had been buried under fear and uncertainty. Love, I realize, is not simply about agreement or harmony. It's about navigating imperfections together, about facing life's unexpected twists with resilience and courage, and about choosing to stay connected even when the path is unclear. Now, as I prepare for the arrival of my child, I feel a profound sense of readiness, not just as a mother, but as a woman who has faced the storm of hidden truths, shocking decisions, and subtle shifts, and emerged whole. I understand that life will always hold surprises, challenges, and moments that test the limits of patience and trust. But I also know that I possess the strength, clarity, and emotional depth to meet them head-on. I have learned to accept, to forgive, and, most importantly, to honor myself. And so, with the baby's tiny clothes folded neatly in the nursery, with Emily's quiet support and Jake's steady presence, I whisper to myself a promise. I am ready to embrace this next chapter, fully aware of its complexity, yet open to its beauty. I am ready to love without fear, to trust without doubt, and to live with the profound knowledge that even the most challenging journeys can lead to self-discovery, healing, and a love that is stronger than I ever imagined. This is not the end of our story. It is the beginning of a life lived with courage, connection, and the deep understanding that acceptance is the most powerful gift we can give ourselves and those we love.